What are Knicks fans so frustrated about? That's the part I don't understand. It confuses me because you have the 11th pick. That's not a lottery pick in my mind. So
Well, it literally is a lottery pick.
I'm not considering that a lottery pick. 11th pick is great and all, but if you don't have your guy at the 11th spot, and it's not someone that you're particularly excited about, why take that pick? I love these takes. Just draft a guy, draft a guy. What if their guy is not there, right? Let's say they wanted Jaden Ivey, right? That's who they wanted. If you can't go up and get him, and you don't feel confident with who's the 11th spot, you just turn that into you got a lot of picks out of this. That's one thing that's important to mention, right? They have over the next couple of years, they've got like 14 first and second round picks.
They have 3 firsts next year.
This is the point, right? So you got to look beyond just 1 year. This is not a 1 year situation, right? And I understand when you enter a draft, everybody wants, like Zach said, to hear your name called, to hear who's coming to my team. Let me watch the highlights and get excited about it. That's great and all, but if that guy isn't there, look at what you turn this into. That being said, though, the job's not done, right? That is the key part of this. You can't sit here and say, oh, what a success, when the thing that you're fishing for is not here, right? So I have no problem with what the Knicks did last night, or 2 nights ago now. No problem at all. And I think if you do, you're just thinking a little too short term. But now you got to complete the move here because the Knicks have not done, as far as I know, anything in free agency, period, under Leon Rose. They've done nothing of significance. This would be their first real move. And if they could secure it, whether you like Jalen Brunson or not, they've done their job, right? That's what they've done. And this was just the first step in doing that, like you mentioned.
So something I want to ask you, and first off, we joked around in the show, the draft grades that get given out. Absurd. Why are we giving teams an F when we haven't seen the guys step on an NBA court? Why are we saying they won the draft before they've played a game?
You've got international guys. You've got guys that haven't played in a year because of injuries. You don't know what they're – and I love, too, like this is a draft class, just watching highlights, too. A lot of interesting players that you don't know how they're going to translate. A lot of guys that are –
high ceilings, low floors.
100%. You got guys that are physically gifted but maybe not, skilled as much. Guys that are really, really tall but don't have as much composure. Guys that can shoot well. Who can they get inside? Like there's so many ups and downs because, hey – they're 19, 18-year-old players. I mean, what are you going to expect from them in their first year in the NBA? Like, yeah, enough with it. This is why I say you don't judge a draft on draft night. Never can, never will.
But my thing is, if the Knicks were to get a grade, I would just go incomplete. I don't think, and it's ridiculous to grade them, but it has to be incomplete because the draft was a precursor to free agency. It was never about the draft. So for Knicks fans to, in one way, say they knocked it out of the park, I don't think that's fair either. Because there's been a lot of, oh my gosh, I can't believe the Knicks. Typical Knicks, LOL Knicks. We don't know that, but we also can't say that Leon Rose, who, by the way, still won't speak to the media, which I think it's getting you need some
you don't like that
transparency.
statement?
No, I think you need I want to see him in front of a mic. I almost forget what he looks like, Alex.
We got to ask questions. Yeah, I had to look him up. There's like 5 photos of him online.
It's
period.
crazy.
That's it. And they're like those paparazzi shots. They're not even real shots.
And this guy was an NBA agent. It's not like he was hiding in the shadows. But I think it's a precursor to free agency because you can look at what they did and getting the firsts, trading Kemba. It was all about having the financial flexibility, which they still don't completely have. And that is for Jalen Brunson, who is clearly the number one target in every way you look at it. Jalen Brunson last year on the Mavericks playing second, third fiddle, almost played himself into that second fiddle. He shined, right? 16 points a game, 37% from 3. It looks like the Knicks are all in on him, hiring his dad to be on the coaching staff. Leon Rose was his agent. Now his son's his agent. You can go down the list. You mentioned Derrick Rose earlier. There's a real connection there. It looks like for the Knicks, and it's a very risky proposition, Jalen Brunson or bust. Curious what you think of that, Alex.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this. Jalen Brunson obviously had an incredible college career, right? Started off very slowly in the NBA, but you've seen year-over-year growth, right? That's one thing that I think is encouraging about this is that year to year to year, you've seen him get better and better on a team that's also gotten better, right? He's led to a lot of the Mavericks' success, and I think that's encouraging. And particularly in the playoffs, what he did was very impressive, right? I think the danger in this is you say, this is a lot of money. This is $100+ million, and the Knicks have showed their cards. They've put themselves in a situation here where they almost have to pay kind of what Brunson wants in a sense because Dallas can match whatever they do, and that's because they own his bird rights, which also makes things challenging here. Is he worth it is the question, right? I go back and forth on this because on one hand, coming into this, if I had just come in here blind, not looked up a single thing, I would have said no. I would have said, I don't think he's worth it. It's a big waste of money. You're just, you're eating the fruit while it's ripe, but you're not worried about when it gets spoiled. I think you're just going way too ahead of the game. I've never said that in my life. So that was completely random. But you look at the stats, and he actually has gotten better year over year, like I mentioned, and was so impressive in the playoffs. And the value is similar to other point guards that play like him. I mean, it's honestly not, that's just the NBA today. I think contracts are insane, but it's not like he's that much of an outlier with what he could do in the next 4 or 5 years.
So the question, does he move the needle enough to make the huge financial commitment worth it? And you're probably looking at 4 for 115, 120, which
I mean,
and if you said in a vacuum, if you were told Jalen Brunson $30 million a year, you are saying no, 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 no. Like there's no way you think that's worth it for this guy. But Alex, that's what the market is now.
that's the same.
And this team, they have failed at the point guard position for so long now. And there's been a million guys brought in, supposed to be the answer, and weren't. So I think when you look at it that's what the market is for a point guard. It's not like you're just overpaying him. Yes, they've shown their hand, and they're going to have to overpay him. Like, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So I think considering that, you can justify it. But does Jalen Brunson move the needle enough where 3 years down the line, like, what's the end game? Is Jalen Brunson the second best player on a championship team? And I get you can't do every move with looking at that lens, but that's what the standard should be in my eyes. And I don't know if that's the case for him. And for someone you give $30 million to, that should always be the standard, at least with what the cap is right now.
So I think Zach brought up an interesting point about the Knicks. They have a lot of good players, not a lot of great players. Will Jalen Brunson be an all-star in the term of his contract?
I would say easy no.
Really?
Yeah. Look how good the point guards are in the East. And
so you're paying $30 million for a guy who won't even be an all-star.
I think that's what the cost is, though. I don't think that's crazy.
So what I wanted to say to you, too, I'm going to read you some names, too, of the guys that make similar 20, 25 million territory and get your reaction. So D'Angelo Russell. That's a guy. His numbers are impressive, actually. And you look at the Timberwolves, what they did last year. It went to the playoffs, very successful. I know they're not all in on paying him what he's worth, but, hey, that's a guy who – is he that much better than Jalen Brunson? It's an interesting question.
I think he's worse than Jalen Brunson.
Terry Rozier gets paid around $24 million.
I think this goes to our point of why you have to pay Brunson.
Kyle Lowry gets paid around $24 million. That's a bona fide champion right there, obviously. And then Malcolm Brogdon, the other guy who is being linked to the Knicks, and that would be a failure, I think, if you get him compared to what you could get with Brunson. And I'm not even a huge Brunson fan. The guy I'd want if I'm the Knicks is Colin Sexton. And I know that this is not a real conversation. This is not going to happen. The Knicks have said they're not interested, so I'm just bringing this up for my own take. But that's a kid who has the explosiveness that I think the Knicks are in search of. What I think is so interesting about moving the needle, do you think that the Knicks have a point guard there already in Emmanuel Quickley?
If Emmanuel Quickley is the starting point guard on opening day, I think it's a disappointment.
And that, to me, can never be the point guard on a championship team.
No.
Neither can Jalen Brunson.
And I love Emmanuel Quickley. Emmanuel Quickley as his team's sixth man or even starting shooting guard, I think he probably plays more into is spectacular. And he's someone who hasn't gotten enough minutes, but you have to go big on a point guard. And even if, though, Alex, they're clearly going for someone, right? They're not going to shed Kemba's salary and likely, you're going to have to trade one more contract with all the firsts. You're probably going to have to unload a first in New Orleans Noel, something like that. They're going to sign someone. So you look at the free agent market, I think it is Jalen Brunson or bust, and you can't go into the year without your starting point guard on the roster. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
So that's why, do I think he'll be an all-star? No. Do I think
that's interesting to me, though, man.
You really think he's going to be an all-star?
I think it almost has to be. I mean, at some point, the playoff Jalen Brunson was an all-star.
Yes, I agree.
That's got to be the regular season Jalen Brunson.
And there is reason for optimism.
Because he was the third wheel on Dallas,
He dropped 41
right?
points in a playoff game.
And Dallas, he was not the primary option. He will be primary secondary with RJ, and we'll see about Julius Randle. One of the primary options on that team, right? And that's a different situation. I think it almost makes it more challenging, though, is can he be that number one option? That's a challenging question to me because it's very different when you're playing.
He's not the number one, RJ Barrett.
But you're 1-2, right? You're close.
I mean, if Julius Randle's on this team, Jalen Brunson's your number 3.
Interesting. So you think he's in a similar role that he feels in Dallas?
So I think he'll be more relied on because you don't have Luka, whose usage rate is through the roof.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
But in terms of like pecking order, he could probably be better than Julius Randle. But off the bat, it's RJ, it's Randle, and then it's Brunson. At least in my eyes.
I do agree with that. I actually do, and I think it's just very interesting to think about how he's going to fit within New York, right? And what's going to happen there because Dallas is a different situation, right? And I think it's important to mention about this too. Dallas wants to keep him. They're not really trying to get rid of Brunson.
And they can pay him the most money.
Mark Cuban has said before, doesn't want to see him go. He's not going to engage in sign and trade offers. He's not going to bother. And I think, again, Brunson's got a lot of leverage here too, like we were talking about Aaron Judge, because he had a tremendous playoffs, and you're going to want to keep that guy for Dallas after you just made the conference finals. You're not going to want to let him go. At the same time, the Knicks have made it. They've shown all their cards, right? That is the one problem with this, but now you just got to make the deal.
Here's the other way I look at it. And is it tampering? Is it a little, dirty here? Maybe. But would the Knicks, who, reminder, their GM's son is the agent of Jalen Brunson, would they create this cap space? Would they hire his dad on the coaching staff if they didn't know something? Like maybe Dallas is just bluffing. Like they have to know something, in my eyes. I don't think you go all in for a guy who likely could just get re-signed on a bigger deal.
I like that point. Yeah.
In Dallas. I don't think, and if the Knicks are doing that without any, inside info, I think that's insane because Jalen Brunson is not the guy you throw your organization away for. So in that sense, I think it's an interesting question here, but they have to do something. And even if, let's say they come to terms, they have to shed one of these contracts. So that's where I turn now, because ideally you could trade Evan Fournier. I think that would be in a perfect world. I just don't think with that $18 million a year, $16 million, whatever it is going to be worth it, especially when he's guaranteed for 2 more. So in a realistic world, you're probably looking at an Noel, at a Burks. In that sense, Alex, what could you see the Knicks doing to create this extra cap space? Because right now, we have to remind everyone they don't have enough money to sign Jalen Brunson. They're around $7 million dollars they need to create to free up enough for what he's going to command.
So I think the interesting thing, too, I know Zach wrote an article recently about Alec Burks and how he had a great season last year as a really great player, but now the injury questions with him are going to hurt his value a little bit. And that's the challenge for the Knicks, right? To get rid of these guys and get something in return is challenging because they're not all that impressive, right? Fournier did not have a good season last year, and you can't really – it's an understatement. You can't really ride that out and hope that he improves this year. To me, though, there's nobody in the Knicks that you really have to keep, right? There's very few people that I think are absolutely essential beyond your R.J. Barrett, your Emmanuel Quickleys, and the young guys that you drafted a year ago. A lot of the in-between guys, the role players on this team, right, the Mitchell Robinsons and things like that.
He's a free agent, too.
How essential is a guy like that? I don't know how essential a guy like that is. And again, when you consider how many draft picks are on the horizon, there's the opportunity to replace certain guys that are indispensable. And I think, again, when you make it very clear Jalen Brunson is your guy, you can't all of a sudden start, picking cards and saying, I can only get rid of this guy or only get rid of this contract. You got to go after your guy. We talked about that in the draft earlier, right? Like the Knicks have made it clear who they want, and whatever contract they have to get rid of to make that happen, I think you do it because there's no one on this team, to me, that is almost like you have to keep, especially at the value some of them are asking for.
I love that point in a thing you said earlier with they have some good, like a lot of good players, but no great players. They almost need to flush out this rotation.
Yeah.
They have too many guys who are, and this is crazy to say, too many guys who are deserving of NBA roles, and it's too many guys to play, but then they don't have the top-end talent to make them real contributors. So you look at a Mitchell Robinson, who they can go over the cap to keep his bird rights, everything like that. I'm of the believer where I'm not giving him this insane deal. I'm probably stopping at 14 to 15 million for 3 to 4 years, and that's honestly high.
Yeah.
But he's going to get more than that.
Yeah.
He's going to get 4 for 80 somewhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should be the Knicks. You look at what Obi Toppin dropping 40 points at the end of last year, just an insane last 10 games. Jericho Sims was a double-double guy when he got minutes. These are some of the young guys you drafted. Quentin Grimes showed a ton of flashes. You got to let them play. And Emmanuel Quickly's at the top front of that because he's shown the front-end talent, but has never got the minutes with Tom Thibodeau. You have to let them play. So if that is flushing out some of these back-end contracts, some of these older guys who I think the worst thing for the Knicks in terms of these contracts was catching lightning in a bottle 2 years ago because then they just ran it back and replaced Reggie Bullock with Evan Fournier. You hit on Nerlens Noel for a year, great, but to give him 3 for 30, whatever it was, not great. And they did the same. Derrick Rose, who was hurt last year, Alec Burks, and all these Taj Gibson, they have other contracts. So they need to shore up this rotation, get younger, get more athletic. But you have those guys that are younger and more athletic. You just have to play them more, and that's what's hurt Tom Thibodeau. And that's why I think at the end of last year, you saw a lot of Knicks fans, rational and unrational, call for his job in a sense just because of the frustration with the rotation.
And that's the question, right? Because I was about to say the same thing as you. As you look at the amount of 21, 22, 23-year-olds on this roster, I can't look at very many of these guys and say I know what they're going to be in the NBA. I just don't know.
Because they haven't been given a shot.
I don't know at this point. I think the question is, will that change this season for Tom Thibodeau? Will he adopt a different mindset and play these guys around a Jalen Brunson, around an Emmanuel Quickly and an R.J. Barrett? Will he really go full on with a young group where, again, I love what Zach mentions too a little bit later, where like, what's the expectation next year? Like, is it really to win a playoff series? No. Is it really to make the playoffs? Maybe. But it's, to me, next year's a lot of a development year just to see what you have in a lot of ways and to kind of, like you mentioned, filter some older guys out and see who you have in these younger guys and see what the talent really is. And the only way to figure that out is play them. And I don't know. I'm not a Knicks fan, so I don't want to speak for a fan base here. But for me, I will take a year of struggles if I'm playing these young guys and seeing what I have. And I think you trust that, hey, in a couple years from now, those guys are going to be as good as you hope they will and kind of start, siphoning out some of the older guys that you already know what they are,
And it's fascinating, too, because you can't have it both ways, and Knicks fans want it both ways. They want you to play the young guys, but they also want them to make the playoffs next year. And that is, I think, where it's frustrating, because you're probably going to have to, Alex, not tank on a year, but temper the expectations to kind of reset here when you didn't have to do that 2 years ago, and you make all the mistakes that you do that offseason, so now you have to reset. So I think it's an interesting conversation they'll have back and forth. And it sounds like, just to wrap up the segment here, you think that they should go through that year where they go through the growing pains and let the young guys play and kind of temper those expectations, and whatever the record is, the record is.
Here's my problem, though. When you get Jalen Brunson, that changes the narrative. Like, this is the thing that frustrates me.
You're not going to pay a point guard $30 million if you're rebuilding.
What I don't understand, this is what confuses. I want to get your thoughts on this. I know we got to get out of this soon, but, like, if you get Jalen Brunson, is that a win now move or a win later move? I don't know.
It has to be win now.
And you got a young team. Like, that's what doesn't make. This is more than Jalen Brunson's a fine player. No problem with him at all. I don't understand it, though. I don't get the timeline perspective, because this is a guy who's not at the beginning of his career, but he's a 4-year vet. That's not the same as the beginning of your career, and he's absolutely not near the tail end, right? He's in not the prime kind of, but he's
26 at the start of next year.
He's getting there, right? And you got a team of young guys, and, like, to me, you're not winning this year. It's going to take a couple years. It's just an interesting move from what the Knicks' timeline is, as a team has been, let's think about next year. When you forfeit the draft now and you go after Jalen Brunson, where's your head at? It's very interesting.
I think, to wrap up here, it hinges on the development of R.J. Barrett. We've seen the leap from year 1 to year 2, then to year 3. The next leap for him is all-star. And
next year, yeah.
If he stays at this, it's great. He's a fantastic player. He'll be the first Knicks draft pick to get a second contract since, I think, David Lee in 2008, something like that. So that would be great if that's what he is. But if he does show that upside, Alex, I think that changes things dramatically to where you have him, you have Jalen Brunson, you have a guy who is a top 10 MVP candidate, and Julius Randle, who knows what he can be. That changes expectations. So.